We totally blew up the protocol.
Totally. That's why.
Yep.
I should have made a joke about that at the end.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of collaboration and reflection as we seek to keep growing as teachers. So this podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Hallway Conversations. My name's Matt Beamers.
I'm Dave Mulder.
I'm Abby DeGroat.
As always, we want to thank you for allowing the three of us to be here with you today. And we want to thank you for joining us in the hallway. Each week, one of us brings a question, and we try to think creatively around it in the context of what it means to teach Christianly. We're good friends who love each other, and we love engaging each other in conversation about our practice. And our deep hope is that you are enriched and encouraged in your own work, and maybe even in your everyday walking around life. While we continue to have a long list of topics that we want to talk about, we also want to know what hallway conversations you would like to hear. So if you have ideas or questions or feedback about this podcast for us, or you simply want to share what hallway conversations you're having, please email us at hallwayconvospod@gmail.com, hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. So guys, a few weeks ago we did a book talk with what I thought was a pretty brilliant protocol that we sort of invented.
We tried so hard, you guys.
We tried so hard.
Did we?
It was called, some of us tried harder than others, but we did what was a 2x2x2, which we're now affectionately naming this protocol the ARC.
That's right.
So this is the ARC protocol, and we get 2 minutes to talk about 2 ideas from 2 books. Now, the 2 books is firm, right? The 2 ideas is sort of negotiable, and the 2 minutes actually means nothing to some of us. So we're going to do our best. You can also tell that in listening to this, we're getting closer to the end of summer and near the beginning of school starting because we're both giddy and quite tired. So we'll see where this goes. So.
That's right.
Abby, I'm going to put you on the spot since you are most concise and good at following protocol.
Pressure.
What's one of the books you brought today, Abby?
Okay, so one of the ones that I brought, and actually both of my books I listened to, so they're actually on my phone, but I wrote some notes here. The first one is Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. Mm-hmm. So Brené is somebody I've listened to quite a bit. She's got a TED Talk I know that's pretty famous. She's got several books on leadership, vulnerability, shame. And I have found her research, she's a grounded theorist, she's a social worker. And so I think just the way that she transfers the research that she's done into lessons that are applicable and can be integrated into your practice. She just does a brilliant job of that, I feel like. Yeah. And also the thing I loved about Dare to Lead is one of the premises of the book is that really you are a leader in any area of your life where you have influence. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think it kind of blows up our picture of like male CEO in a suit, kind of leadership, and says, no, actually, like you're a leader in the home, teachers are leaders in their classrooms, kids are leaders, so anywhere you have influence, you're a leader. And the premise of the book is that to become kind of a brave leader, so being willing and courageous enough to lead with authenticity and vulnerability, choosing and practicing your values, building trust with the people that you lead, and developing actually resilience. Sorry, not resistance. But so she talks a lot about what vulnerability is and isn't. It's actually the courage to face kind of hard things. She calls it the risk of failure or emotional harm. And as a teacher, modeling that to students, but also being firm with boundaries around it. Clear as kind is one of the kind of taglines that she offers. So having the courage to be honest in a classroom with each other in your work. I think as a teacher, hearing it really has shaped my ability to hear feedback in ways that I can not get defensive and put armor up, right? She talks about armor a lot, armoring up, and having the courage not to just be defensive, but to hear things and and to then do better. And so I just think for so many reasons, teachers could really get a lot out of this book.
Yeah, it's that idea of armoring up is,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that resonates with me. Like I've read this book. I've watched Brené Brown. She's got a wonderful, I think it's on Netflix. We watched actually together as a family. It's been really helpful for me for all kinds of reasons in terms of the, hey, what does vulnerability look like? The importance of that. But the armoring up really resonates with me because, on the one hand, I can be a bit of a paradox in that, I want to be better at what I do, whether it's as a parent, as a husband, as a professor. Like I want that, right? Like so on the one hand, I want the feedback because I do want to get, like, who doesn't want to be better at what they do? Yeah. And yet on the other hand, my identity sometimes is so wrapped up in those things that to get feedback sort of makes me question my identity. So then I armor up, right? Yeah. And so how do you, in the end, for me, I remember in reading and watching her, this idea of do you trust that the person giving you the feedback isn't questioning your identity, but they actually want to help you, use the gifts that God has given you for the sake of the kingdom, for the sake of students, for your family, and but you have to trust that.
Yeah.
And trusting can be hard.
And it takes work, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I talk about, like, I don't know if you guys do this, but when you receive, like, we get student feedback every semester, right? And to open that, like, I have to be in the right headspace in order to open those evaluations. It's a thing.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of work that I have to, do in order to hear all of that well.
She's been helpful for me in sort of just trying to work through that and to normalize those things in some ways. That it's okay to feel that, and now how do you move forward? Yeah.
And she rightly says you can't have creativity without failure, right? You have to be okay with, you can't have breakthroughs and good work unless you are okay with getting it wrong sometimes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's good. Thanks, Abby.
Yeah.
How about you, Dave?
So I brought a lovely little book by Timothy Keller. This is not a teaching book at all. The book is called The Prodigal God. Most of you are maybe familiar with the story of the prodigal son in Scripture, and so this is a book that Keller wrote about that parable that Jesus told. And I went through this book as a study with a small group at our church many years ago now. But if you haven't read the book, I highly, highly recommend it. What I loved about this book is it really pushed me to rethink a lot about my personal relationship with the gospel. And it caused me to just think through what I thought I knew about the gospel in light of what the Bible actually says, right? Like that's such a silly thing. So the parable Jesus tells, it's about the prodigal son, comes from Luke 15, and Jesus is telling the story about this. It's in the context of parables about being lost, right? The lost coin, the lost sheep. And this is the parable of the lost son, the prodigal son. But the context really matters for this. Jesus is telling this parable in mixed company, right? So he's surrounded by a crowd of people, tax collectors and sinners, I'm putting that in air quotes, right? These wicked people, but also Pharisees and teachers of the law. And he starts off his story, there was a man who had two sons. And that's where Keller starts and says, we get this wrong so often because we want to make it the prodigal son. And it's like, notice the parable starts, the man has two sons. And in this mixed company, yes, you've got the prodigals, the runaways who are living extravagantly and all that. But you've also got the older brother types, the ones who stayed. That's the Pharisees and teachers of the law. And it just challenged me to rethink how I was always taught this parable, because really what the message is, and Keller makes this really clear, both sons were lost. The one who ran away and the one who stayed both needed the lavish love of the Father. And that was such an important message for me to hear. And where Keller ends up going in the book, and this is why I think it's important for folks who are Christians, who've been Christians for a long time, to grapple with the message of this book. It's easy for us, for me, I'll point the finger again at myself here, to judge, well, look at those runaways, look at how they're sinning, all that, right? They're in need of grace somehow. And Keller gets us to the point where he's saying, actually, the point might be for the Pharisees, those of us who feel like we've got it all figured out and know what we're supposed to do. It might be for us to really have to do some inner work and some discernment. And those of us who are quick to judge others' lostness, might actually be blind to our own
Mhm.
lostness and how much we're in need of grace. So, I don't know. I found it an incredibly compelling book, and I don't feel like I've given any spoilers for it. That way, it's just a lovely little book that just challenges and pushes your thinking about parables that you maybe think you know.
Yeah, no, I like that. I'm right away making a connection, even just in a classroom, right? Of like that, this reminder that every student who walks through the door of our classroom or the front doors of our school comes with a lostness. Like I think sometimes it's easy to categorize, like the lost, or hey, they seem like they're doing well, and maybe there's different elements or levels of that, but that everyone comes into our room carrying a burden, right? And some people can, put a mask on and hide that better than others, perhaps.
As if we've got our stuff all together.
As if we got our stuff all together, and I think sometimes we have to remember that as teachers, actually, right? Is to say like the students who might appear to have all their stuff together are our friends, or to know, like, you know what, there's hurt in all of us, right? And we can do it ourselves, right? Like put out this perception of how hey, this is how I want to be perceived, right? I've shared some of that with you, even in my own life, the hardness of things going on, and yet wanting to present a different way, and so. No, I appreciate that.
For me, like the longer I've lived, I can't remember a time in my life where I wouldn't have called myself a Christian, right? I grew up in a Christian family. I've gone to church my whole life. I'm a Pharisee, right? Yeah. Like if I look at that crowd of people around Jesus, I'm a Pharisee, and I needed to hear this message so clearly. How about you, Matt? What's a book?
I came across this book a couple of years ago now. In fact, I remember coming across a friend, Aaron Bart. I think it was on his Twitter account, to be honest. It's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And the title just really, right away as soon as I saw the title, it really resonated with me, because one of the things that I'm very aware of, and I have friends who make fun of me in a loving way most of the time, is I have this phrase that I use quite often, too often, and it's the phrase, I got to keep moving. You got to keep moving. Like I use it a lot. Like I'm in a conversation. All right, thanks. I got to keep moving. And it's this idea of always sending the message that I'm always on. Like I got to go to the next place, or I got things to do. And the title resonated with me because I think I've been challenged in my life over the past few years for different reasons to how do you actually not move, and how do you be fully present, whether it's in conversations, whether it's physically. Whether it's with my, where's my phone when I'm having dinner with my family, and it's this idea of like, what spiritual practices, the book forced me to reflect on what spiritual practices I need to put in place to get to the outcome I want, to not just desire it, to say I'm gonna slow down, right? Like that it's not going to happen unless you actually put practices in place, because otherwise it's you're just giving lip service to it, like it's which is no different than in anything, whether it's a sport or anything. If that's the outcome, you've got to put time practice, and so he just talks about these different practices of three really simple, like he just talks about silence, Sabbath, and simplicity. All three of which I'm not great at, to be honest with you. If I think about even Sabbath, like for me to rest is really hard. Like even in my resting, I don't feel like I'm fully at rest. So one of the ways I know for myself that I've learned to rest over the last few years is actually by going for drives, because I don't have access to my phone. Like I can listen to a radio, I can listen to a podcast, it can be in silence, and so it's sort of a forced rest, which I know maybe sounds terrible to some people, but for me it's like
putting it out of access,
just like actually putting things in place where I put my phone at night, those types of things. So just to sit in silence, right? Like even like noise in the house or in my office, I'm always asking Abby, hey, what song should we listen to?
See, and I'm real good at silence.
Yeah, totally. So
I'm not gonna lie. I'm like an expert.
Yeah, totally. So Abby and I get along really well when it comes
That's
to
great.
that. So, and even just this idea of simplicity, like how do we simplify our lives, like whether it's the stuff in our lives, whether it's just trying to be all things to all people. So I just like this idea, like the I like the language of the ruthless elimination. Like you have to be ruthless if you want to get there. So I really recommend it. And he just talks about the quiet life. And as much as I love to talk, and as much as I love to listen to music, and I do think I'm actually getting better at embracing silence. So I recommend this book to anybody, especially people at the beginning of a school year when there is hurry and rush. And we feel that. I got to get the syllabus. I got to get... is to actually say, how can I make some choices and put some practices in place that actually allow me to be more whole and to flourish as a human being.
I used to teach Thoreau, right? It reminds me of some echoes of Walden Pond, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would totally. That resonates, Abby. That I'd say that's a good connection between that and this book. So, Abby, a second book.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to talk about one that I'm currently listening to. I'm not quite finished with it, but I feel like I have enough of a handle on it. It's called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, Dutch guy who is a psychiatrist, I can't remember, one of the two, but he's an MD, and he has kind of dedicated his life's work to studying trauma and its effects and how it manifests in our physical beings, right, and how it comes out. And to start off, he kind of really, I think, makes the case that trauma is probably the most neglected public health crisis in the West. Unresolved trauma.
Interesting.
And he kind of draws on a bunch of scientific studies for that. A couple of just really kind of startling statistics. The number of Americans killed by family members outnumbers the number killed in both world wars.
What?
Right? Domestic violence, right? Women have double the risk of domestic violence in their lives than they do of breast cancer.
Wow.
Right, so I mean, and like he cites the ACE study, the groundbreaking, I don't know if you've heard of ACEs, right? So adverse childhood experiences. And just the number of people that have had a number of adverse childhood experiences, really hard things in their life. So seeing a family member like get beat up, parents in jail, experiencing violence themselves, sexual abuse, neglect, things like that. He just argues if we don't address, they have physical outcomes. So the higher your ACE score, the more likely you are to have adverse actual health outcomes. And so it's costing us money, it's costing us productivity, not to mention the severe effects it has on a person's quality of life, right?
Wow.
So as Christians, it's just really eye-opening for me to think about the way that God loves each of us and the way that this must just break his heart, right? First of all, for each of the kids who are experiencing these things and adults who experience trauma, but also as teachers, understanding how behavior, right, is really rooted in trauma when it is problematic.
Yeah.
And how that helps us react to students and understand where they're coming from in ways that are really important, I think, and can help us help them. So there are several books on trauma. A friend of ours, Tara, who teaches in the social department here, comes and speaks to our ed psych classes about trauma, has other books she recommends too, but I think it's an issue teachers need to be aware of, and he argues about that in the book too, for systematic training about trauma and its effects and how to help students.
So what I love as I'm hearing, I have not read the book, I should just say that, right? But it gets to this thing that we hold pretty deeply, right? The way that God has created us to be.
Right.
Like, yes, we are physical beings,
Yes.
but yes, we are spiritual beings,
Yes.
right? So this whole idea when Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your
Mhm.
mind and all your strength, and it's like you are all of those things
Yep.
at the same time.
And you can't
they interact.
separate them.
Right,
Yeah.
right. We're holistic.
We're holistic, yeah. You can't, we talk about physical domains as well as, mental and
Social.
spiritual and social,
Yeah.
and you can't separate that,
Yeah.
right? And so it comes out in all sorts of ways
Mm-hmm.
if you don't address it.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I'm feeling like I got to read it next.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot.
Dave, how about you? A second book?
Yeah, I got a second one. So the second book I brought is Technopoly, The Surrender of Culture to Technology by Neil Postman.
Yeah.
And you guys know I'm an ed tech guy. I've read this book several times. I first read it when I was doing a Master of Ed studies way back in the day. This book was written in 1992.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's an old book.
Yes.
And it is one of the most prescient critiques of modern culture, to like contemporary
Wow.
culture today that I've read for a book that was
Interesting.
written like 30 years ago, right? Like
Oh
brain's
my word,
imploding.
92 is 30 years
I know,
ago.
I know.
I need a moment.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't think you needed to say that out loud. So
Sorry. Yeah.
thank you. Sophomore year at
Okay.
university.
So here's the thing, though. Okay, Postman, he's an academic. Like he totally is an academic, but he's written other really great stuff. But he writes well for a popular audience. But I just want to frame it that way. This is probably a more academic read.
Sure.
So you got to know that coming into it. But it is such an astute cultural critique. I'd say it is a book about technology, but it's really a book. It's a sociology book more than anything else, I think. And Postman was a scholar of communication theory in a lot of ways, right? So in this book, he's talking about tools, and he takes a very broad view of technology. So anything that's a tool that humans devise. So yes, okay, we think of computers are tools. Yes, they are, and that's maybe where you go first with technology. But he says so is writing. Writing is a tool, and writing is a technology in that sense, right? And so, like, you got to take pencils, right?
Yeah.
Like, all kinds of things that you would use that you think of. I mean, anything that makes work easier is a tool. Okay. So, and he says in this book, there's been a shift in the history of humanity from being tool-using cultures where we had these things that we would create, some of them physical like a hammer or some of them intellectual like language, the tools that we would use that help you to get work done. So you move from tool-using cultures to what he calls technocracies, where there's people who have specialized knowledge of particular kinds of tools and they become elevated in society in different ways, right? And then he says, and there is this further shift where it can be technopoly. So like technopoly would be where technology actually rules and everything else is subservient to technology. And he said at the time of his writing in 1992, there's really only one technopoly in the world, and that's the United States of America. And oof, like from that position in the early 90s, he has so accurately predicted where we would land as a culture 30 years later. It is almost scary how accurate he is. So that's my encouragement if you want to read it, right?
Encouragement or discouragement?
No, I encourage people to
Okay,
read it, but it's discouraging to read it. And he's really asking questions in the book saying, like, okay, so if all the information is free out there, and which it is on the World Wide Web, right, the information is free, he argues actually against that. He says this is a problem for society because if there aren't some kinds of baffles to slow the spread of information, then suddenly every person's perspective is equally valid.
And we are there.
How do we judge what is true? Like, and he was arguing this in the early 90s, right? And so that raises a whole bunch of questions about, so what? What do we do with this? And so after like 12 chapters of bringing us to this point where you're going, oh no, our society is doomed, his final chapter in the book is called The Loving Resistance Fighter. And he says, this is the antidote. So I'd like to just actually read a short bit of it here. He says, like, how do we fight against this tendency toward technopoly? You have to love. You have to love and care well for other people and stand against dehumanization, right? And so he says, those who resist American technopoly are people who take seriously the meaning of family loyalty and honor, and who, when they reach out and touch someone, expect that person to be in the same room as them. Ooh. People who know the difference between the sacred and the profane and do not wink at tradition for modernity's sake. People who take the great narratives of religion seriously and do not believe that science is the only system of thought capable of producing truth. And then this is where he ends up. People who admire technological ingenuity but do not think it represents the highest possible form of human achievement. So I just find this really compelling. I'm a technologist myself, right? I value technology and all that. But I found this to be a really compelling read.
Yeah.
And I would encourage folks to pick up a copy, even though it's an old book about technology.
Yeah. But it's interesting to read that now with the lens of a place like Twitter or Facebook, right?
Totally.
Or smartphones in general.
Yeah, smartphones in general, right? We're all, all the truth is at your fingertips.
Mm-hmm.
And all the things all your truths can be confirmed.
Right.
On a phone, right? Like, this is what I believe. Let me find someone who can tell me that I'm right in believing it, versus how do I engage critical thought, right?
And so then we're looking for echo chambers,
totally,
right?
Yeah.
Like that. I want to find people who are already just going to pat me on the back for what I already think. And with easy access to information, you can find someone who agrees with you, right?
But David, it's interesting because on the one hand, we need to be having critical conversations and learn how to disagree well. But there's also an element of it can feel very unsafe nowadays to come in with a different perspective.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
Even sadly, we can have that among friends now, where it's you know what, we don't engage in tough conversations because we sort of know how the story's going to end, and so we deem it not worth it. And yet to not have those conversations, because they're so worthwhile, and actually learning how to have those conversations in relationship is what I would say strengthens the relationship, rather than just kind of this surfacey. We're not going to talk about politics. We're not going to, let's say we're not going to talk about the vaccine. We're not going to talk about religion. We're not going to talk about LGBTQ issues because we disagree, and we're never gonna find common ground. But it's this posture of, for so many, I think we come into now so many conversations of not what can I learn or what can my neighbor teach me, but how do I prove that person wrong? And that's such an unhealthy, because I said this to somebody the other day. I can't remember the last time I ever changed someone's mind on a topic, right? But that's not the goal. Right. But it seems like it has become the goal.
And Postman's argument would be the tools that we're using for communication are part of the problem,
absolutely,
right? And instead of just sitting down in a room together the way we do here, we try to engage each other in a conversation, right? What if that became much more of the norm? I think that's really what he's arguing for in this book.
Well, to go back to Brené Brown, right? We all, our armor's getting thicker and thicker, right?
Yeah.
And what does it mean to approach a conversation open-handed and hospitably rather than tight-fisted, right? And I think we're just becoming and I speak for myself, I'm not, when I say we, I'm not for the listener. I can be for Matt Beamers, right? I can become more tight-fisted about the things I believe in.
And then here, I'm thinking about the other book I brought here too, The Prodigal God. Here I am, the older brother, I'm the Pharisee in this whole thing too, looking down my nose at other people, but I'm part of the problem.
I listen to a podcast regularly called Pantsuit Politics, and the two gals that do that have a book called I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening.
Oh, yeah.
Which is also just another one I would recommend about having those hard conversations, especially around politics or other things that just a posture of connection over changing minds.
Right.
Yeah.
Folks, ending our podcast today talking about connection feels appropriate. So I'm going to save my second book for next time, because I just feel like this is an appropriate way to end. And I think as we go into our week, to encourage our listener and to encourage even the three of us as friends, right, is how do we have meaningful conversations and make it safe for people to bring divergent opinions, right? And folks, we know that your time is valuable. We want to thank you for joining us today for another hallway conversation. So whether it's in this day, this week, this month, this coming school year, as you prepare for that, we hope that the Lord gives you what you stand in need of. We want to thank each of you for the good, God-delighting work you're doing in your schools and in your communities. And as you go into this week, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace and give you peace and give you peace. Amen. Have a good week, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
This podcast was quite literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is an independent podcast created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Thanks for listening.